Welcome to the Garden Like a Guru Show, and I'm your host, Tyhson, Banighen, a permaculture instructor, and I'm with my lovely co-host, Sarah Bradshaw, who is her one and only garden guru. If you joined us, you are in a really fortunate opportunity to be able to follow the gardening all the way through, from the beginning of planting seeds all the way through to harvest. And for some of you, you're thinking, well, why would I join the show at this time? Well, for most people, the May long weekend is really when they've started their gardens. So for most of you, this is a time that you should probably join the show and get the techniques about how to start your garden and grow your garden. So this is the right time to join the show. Lots of good stuff, both in the gardening circle at 2 levels of involvement, one at 33 and one at 99. And at 99, you get to consult with the one and only garden guru herself and get advice on how to structure and grow in your local area, in your back front yard, or even on your deck. So without further ado, welcome, Sarah. And what's up with this week and planting cycles and lunar eclipses and God knows what all?
Yeah, well, here we are saying goodbye to May, and your point that it's in a lot of ways, this peak gardening season is very accurate. Up until about excuse me, up until about 3 years ago, the largest number of the seed sales peaked in May and June. The last few years, gardening's been gaining ground, and seed companies are finding they're sold out by May and June. But traditionally, this is buy your seeds, buy your plants, get them in time. And for those who live north, you still got time that you might have to be waiting. For those who are regulars, you might notice I have a change of venue going on around me, and hopefully by next week, I'll have a much, much better internet connection and be much clearer. But I'm saying hello to you this week from beautiful outskirts of Cherryville. I can't claim we are in any way downtown. But Cherryville is part of the Shuswap bioregion. So, temperature and climate-wise, it's not going to be much different from Tappan. But, it's a place where there's a little less industrialization, a little more room to breathe, and I'm excited about relocating the venture out here and getting settled in this summer.
So I've always wondered, why Cherryville? Was cherries grown there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Shuswap bioregion is ideal for cherries.
Uh-huh.
And when I was a teenager in Salmon Arm, the first week of July every year, Salmon Arm, I believe it started on the 7th of July, or the first weekend after Canada Day. Salmon Arm had a big week-long blast called the Cherry Jubilee. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people employed through the cherry orchard in the Shuswap. When you try to grow cherries in the Okanagan, you have to keep going up and up and up and up and up those hills, because cherries need a cooler climate than apples or apricots or peaches. They will turn to mush. They will be raisins on the tree if they are grown too warm. And so Cherryville's in the Shuswap bioregion. It's actually the Shuswap River runs right through it. And years back, things were transported by water and by train. And being right on the Shuswap River afforded a certain amount of mobility for shipping things and getting them to the proper rail line. lines and that. Cherryville, like the north of Anglemont, Solista area on Shuswap Lake, was really, really badly cut off by transportation decisions that were made.
Mm-hmm.
And Cherryville, for the North Shuswap, it was going strictly to rail, eliminating the boat traffic and building a great big highway that barely skirts the southern part of our lake. For Cherryville, the really big blow came to the agricultural world, came in the 60s when the ridiculous decision to dam the Columbia River and create the upper and lower Arrow Lakes.
Well, don't get me started on that one.
Yeah, okay. So it just as it killed all of the towns that it flooded,
Yeah, really.
it killed all of the towns that were connected.
Well, I didn't understand that connection. I mean, I grew up on the Columbia River, and where they created the High Arrow Dam is where we used to go swimming off the bluffs. So literally,
yeah.
I lived in Robson, which was all cherry and apple orchards as far as you could see, which all became developed into nothingness, right? So yeah, my whole eco-spiritual warrior background comes from that High Arrow Dam, and realizing what an atrocity it was to build that dam and sell all the power at less than market value in perpetuity to the United States of America. So anyway, yeah. Michael wants us to get back for this week in the garden, but yeah.
We do. We do need to get on with it, but that actually, I'm glad we're going to come back to this, because what we just talked about touches on this week's subject, which is the importance of your garden and feeding yourself and food sovereignty. So we're going to kind of circle back to some of the things we just kind of brushed on. But okay, we're here at the end of May. And we're tomorrow morning, early in the morning, we go into Pisces. Now, Pisces is a fabulous planting sign, and we're in the third quarter, so still some time to do some planting, okay? You get things in the ground if you can. Then on Wednesday, we're still going to be in Pisces, but the moon's going to hit that entering into the fourth quarter phase and really start to wane and darken. So if the planting signs are really, really strong, you can indeed put in some of your underground developers, okay? So, on Thursday, you could get away with, Wednesday and Thursday, you can get away with planting root vegetables. On Thursday and Friday, you're not really going to risk planting much of anything, largely because Aries is just a brutal hot sign and we're now in Taurus, which is a strong sign, but it's not a moist sign. It's not a fertile, wet sign. It's also a dry, arid sign. So probably no planting for Thursday, Friday. Saturday, you can pick it up again with fruit trees and shrubs and things that need to develop underground. And of course, your root vegetables will do incredibly well, because once we hit Saturday, the moon's into Taurus. So we've got, Taurian sun, Taurian moon. You can get away with planting any of your root veg. Don't try and put in things that are going to be soft and leafy and flowery once the moon's gone into that final quarter. We don't have a lot of significant events coming except for that quarter moon change. And when you look up at the sky at the moon, I want you to remind yourself that the moon says dock. It starts out as the letter D. It becomes the O when it's full, and then it becomes the letter C at the end of it. And so when you look at the moon, and you keep that in mind, you can tell whether it's growing or shrinking, even if you're not a regular moon follower, a regular astrology person. Now, transplanting is so much more forgiving than planting, okay? And it's a good thing to remember as the season progresses and plants go on sale at all of the garden centers and that you can transplant far, far more liberally and play with the signs and exercise a bit of leeway, much, much more when you're transplanting, because you've already got an established root system. You've already got a plant. You're just kind of relocating. Now, it still pays to pay attention to those minor details. Like if you're transplanting herbs, do try and do them on a day that is, for leaf or flower structure. If you're transplanting something like peppers or tomatoes that fruit, either a root or a fruit day is going to give you, the best results. But yes, transplanting is far, far more forgiving. And, in 2001, we built a community garden in Salmon Arm. And like, so many government run programs, the funding was very, very, very hard to set in place and get up and running. And it was approved right at the end of May. And we went, as a matter of fact, the day that the project started was the 28th of May, which was my birthday. Wow. And so at the 28th of May, we now had to interview and hire the young people we were going to train, give them their week or two of initial, orientation and training, build a garden, raised beds and all, and plant it.
I remember those days. Your crew came up and did some pruning in my raspberry bed.
We did indeed. And what happened was the garden centers, by the time we got the garden all ready to go, we were well into June. And the garden centers were closing down any of their bedding plants. I mean, they were drying out in corners somewhere, so completely root bound, that when many of them found out it was for the community garden, they said, here, take this whole tray of basil. Here, take this whole tray of, right, all sorts of things. And we planted and we tended and we watered and we did all sorts of things, like with Turtle Island or Stewart's Garden at that time, and trail building and that. But long about late September, fall fair time, there was a letter to the editor in the local paper that went along the lines of, I've lived in this area my whole life. My mom gardened here. My dad gardened here. I've gardened here. I walked past those young fools building that garden, at the end of May and June, and watched them shoving plants in the ground right around the time the solstice was hitting. And I'm laughing up my sleeve because those young idiots, that stuff's never going to grow. That's going to be the most pathetic garden ever. And I walk by it every day and go, what is going on? It's lush, it's growing, it's green, it's wonderful. Well, the one thing we had going for us was that it was built on an old swamp that had been kind of filled in, but they'd never been able to build any houses on it because it repeatedly semi-floods every spring. It's very low lying, it's very moist, it's very, so even in the height of summer, it has good groundwater. The other thing was we were literally planting in half-grown plants. I mean, we were not putting in little tiny 2-week-old tomato plants. We were putting tomato plants that were already completely filling tomato cages.
Right.
And, you know, so, you know, I took heart from that we, even when we thought we were planting really, really late, because we tended carefully and, you know, had plenty of access to water and had good, healthy plants, we still got a fabulous garden. So, you know, we're coming close to the end of get her in the ground season, but we're not done yet.
Yeah, so get at her, boys and girls.
Yep, you bet. So, yeah, food sovereignty. I know this isn't about gardening, um, but I have to mention this. One of my very, very beloved mentors was unfortunate enough to be forced to attend a Native residential school, the same one that is currently in the news for the horrific discovery of what has long been part of the oral history. I am not going to say it has long been rumored. No, it is part of the Shishwemic Nation oral history that children died and were buried and were never acknowledged in that hellhole. And my beloved Mary Thomas went there and told me very few stories, but she told me one about a nun that was so mean that Mary stopped crying when she was 10, because to cry in front of this woman was to let her win, was to give her the upper hand, and was actually to invite further abuse. Mary was 10. And I've been haunted since hearing that story with the image of a beautiful little girl with huge brown eyes and a lovely round face. Did they well up with tears? Did she choke when she held them back? Did she have to blink those pretty eyes to not cry? Like, how awful. But one of the things that Mary told me was that her devotion to restoring the native plants, to restoring the ecology that she grew up with, was that they were forced into submission with the use of food. They were often taken from places they knew very, very well, where they could easily feed themselves, and placed on reserves where they could not do that any longer. The children were often shipped far enough from home that, as in the case of Cheney Wenjack, they couldn't make their way back. They couldn't feed themselves on the road. And, you know, so I want to talk about how important a garden is in terms of food sovereignty, how important it is that we be able to feed ourselves, to feed our families, and to share food with our friends. I'm not sure there's anything more important than preserving your ability to feed yourself.
And that fellowship of eating around the table with friends and family, what you produced in the garden, it can't be excelled by any other experience in my life anyway. It's just an amazing experience, right?
It is. And I've had the wonderful, wonderful honor of volunteering at the International Indigenous Leadership Conferences when they were being held in Yaxlip territory near Lilwat. And we had food that was hunted. We had food that was caught by fisher people. We ate food that had been picked from the wild. We had puffballs, the most enormous puffballs I've ever seen. We had wild caught salmon. We had a young a young girl's first deer kill. She shot her first deer at the age of 16. We sang it out of the pit with the elders leading us, and cut it up and shared it around. This is something that our Shuswamic people knew well, my Cree friends knew well, that you offer food, you offer drink, you sit, you share, you eat together, you talk. It's very difficult to remain angry and sore of heart with a person when you are sitting at a table sharing sustenance.
Absolutely. You know, and the Callahan people that I was fortunate enough to work with in the Philippines, we were able to do a video with them about their indigenous beliefs. And even though they were, Christianized, so to speak, their tradition was that if there was an argument in the family, then that called for, between families, it called for a feast. And a pig was slaughtered. And out of that, everybody had to come to that feast, right? And share, and it was talked through. So everything was resolved around the communal meal. It was always the way to come to reconciliation with any dispute was the communal meal, right?
And it's so vital, and it's not just the eating of the food; it's the preparing of, the gathering of, the production of. I have had experiences with people where, we were maybe working together at the same place and not necessarily working harmoniously. And there's one particular case, and we went out to gather. The mushroom harvest was so abundant that year. I think it was 2009. It had been a very dry summer. And then it started to rain in September, and it rained so much that a lot of the farmers couldn't harvest their potatoes in the area. They just couldn't get on the field. And the mushrooms started. And this woman and I went out into the field to gather mushrooms. And we gathered so much that we overfilled our baskets, and we still had to walk back. And we were passing all these amazing mushrooms. And we took my vest off and we made it into a sling that we each had to carry two corners. And we continued to fill it with mushrooms. Well, by the time we got back to the house, we were struggling with this unwieldy load. We were laughing, we were muddy, we were tired. And it seemed silly that we had been arguing and squabbling about some of the crap that we'd been letting get in the way. And, you can see that, my mom's solution to us being fracas when we were kids was to set us to work in the garden. And pretty soon you're having fun with each other in the garden. And, so, there's this heart connection with food that I think that we have to get back to. And so, I understand the need to beautify. I understand how wonderful it is to plant petunias and geraniums and begonias and, coreopsis and, have your clarkia out there blooming. Like I fully understand that. But to me, it is so important that we also learn to grow food. And for those of you who can actually grow more than just a few things on your balcony, please look at those foods that produce good, solid nutrition that will carry you through the winter. We have become addicted to eating at height of summer food all year long. And when we stop and analyze it, it's inferior, okay?
And it's out of season for us, right? It's not the proper time to eat that.
It is, and it's inferior For you to have a ripe, juicy tomato in the middle of January or February, you either have to grow it inside yourself or you are buying something that has been pit green, gassed, irradiated, shipped all over the place, handled by Christ knows how many people, put in warehouses that have been fumigated who knows how many times. And when you get it, it's still inferior because it was picked green and shipped all over the place. I have encountered so many people younger than me who grew up on the prairies who have absolutely no idea that an apricot is so big and so thick and so juicy that you cannot wear one without rubber gloves, a bib, or a wash up afterwards. They think these little orangey leather pieces of crud that are sold in the store are apricots, and they don't like apricots. Well, I don't like those things either, but I love apricots. And I know, we lived for years in northern Alberta, and I know adult people, my children's age, like in their 30s and 40s, who have never, ever, ever tasted a vine ripe tomato.
Well, they're missing, aren't they? I mean, a tomato in the store is just tasteless.
I had one young man, he was 20 or 21, and we were working out in the garden at Omehaven, and I said to him, "Oh, I'm just thirsty and tired. I'm going to, I'm going to have a tomato. Have one." And I tossed him a tomato. And he said, "I don't like tomatoes." And I said, "Really, Kyle? Take a bite. You don't like it, you can even spit it out." So he took a bite and he went, "Okay." And he said, "Okay, I like that tomato." And I said, "Oh, well, then try this one. This is a really sweet one." And he said, "They don't all taste the same." And hell no, take this one. This is a really sweet one. "Okay, come over here and taste this one. And now come over here and taste." And he was like, what the hell have I been eating? Because these don't taste anything like the tomatoes that, and I went, "What, the tomatoes that they put on a Wendy's burger in Grand Prairie?" Yeah, basically. So when you grow your own food and you grow it in season and you eat in alignment with what is in season where you are living, you are feeding your body both physically and energetically in a way that matches what it needs in that environment, in that moment. Absolutely. You cannot live in the Arctic and live on pineapple. Okay, you just can't. You can live in Bali and walk out and pick what comes out ripe on the trees and be just fine. You can live in Bhutan and survive very, very nicely on fish out of the river and fruit out of the trees and things that grow on the ground and volunteer themselves. But that is not where we are living. We are living wherever we are living. And so that's where we have to address the food situation. Now, we've replaced winter vegetables with a continuation of the summer vegetables. And not only are they inferior and less tasty and less nutritious, they're not giving our bodies the energy and the caloric kind of balance that they need. And we know this. We call those foods that really kind of address that need for something warm and heavy in the stomach and something that's going to last us while we're outside working. We refer to them as our comfort foods. And they do indeed bring us comfort, and a baked potato is every bit as lovely in my mind as a green salad. It's just a different season. And I personally love the shredded winter salads, all the slaws, not just cabbage, but, grating celeriac and summer turnip and golden beet and some chioggia and maybe some gobo. And it It's all grated, it's easy to eat, it's flavorful, it is absolutely wonderful. And it's wonderful at a time that the tomatoes in the store are anemic. The iceberg lettuce is nothing but some green slime wrapped around some water. And, the radishes have absolutely no bite. And who knows what those cucumbers even taste like, because they don't taste like a cucumber. So, at a time when that's all inferior, what's really rocking is these foods that our grandmothers and great grandmothers ate that we have forgotten about. But we can grow them. We can grow them right here, and we can store them, and we can eat all year long without having to go every week to the grocery store and buy your fresh veg.
Yeah, so important, so important. I was talking on the healing hour that I know that for some people this is really difficult, right? But there another intermediate possibilities is if you can't do this, grow your own, which we really want you to do, then what you can do is find an organic farm close to you and get your food from there. So there's really no excuse almost everywhere in North America, if you do the homework, that you can source good, high quality food. So it's something you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family, you owe it to future generations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I want to put a plug in here for what I think is one of the most brilliant cooperative local ways to address your food needs. And that is referred to as CSA, or community shared agriculture.
Yes.
And I want to talk about the benefits of that for people who don't understand what is going on. Farming is costly, okay? I am getting my baby chicks tomorrow. Now, 50 baby chicks are going to cost me just under $100. And these chicks will be raised for a very short period of time and will be butchered for our meat for the majority of the year. So, those are going to cost me money to raise. Now, every farmer goes through this, and with community shared agriculture, rather than you buying in the moment at the farmer's market, which I agree is lovely, but what a community shared agriculture system does is you pay by either paying for the entire season up front, or you give usually post-dated checks for your weekly or monthly allotments of your CSA. What that enables the farmer to do is to buy upfront and hire upfront, so he can get a jump on the season, or she can get a jump on the season. And without having to scramble or go to work somewhere else or find a way to get the money somehow or other, they can actually concentrate on growing you your food, be it meat or be it plant food. It all costs money and it all takes work. Now, in 1995, I moved back from northern Alberta to the Shuswap and hunted out and found Wildflight Farms did a community shared agriculture program. And I phoned them and introduced myself, and Louise assured me that they were going to be doing it again. They were done for the year, but they would be signing people up right after the new year. And she was eager to, have me on the list and, da-da. So the night came and I trotted up the highway to the new community center at the top of the hill and walked into the basement heading for the room, and couldn't get in the room because it and the hall stairwell were kind of completely overflowing. So we all kind of wedged in as best we could. Well, Herman looked around for a few minutes and said, "We need to talk." And he and Louise disappeared and came back and said, "We're going to schedule this for like a week or two from now. and we'll take your names and phone numbers and that, but this is like probably 4 times many people than we had. And I can't guarantee that we can accommodate all of you. So we all kind of nodded and filled out the form and, walked away going, wow. Well, I knew Louise through a healers group that we both belonged to. And the next day or two, she phoned me, Louise through a healers group that we both belonged to. And the next day or two, she phoned me to assure me that they were setting up another meeting. They were getting it all together. But it had dawned on Herman, he had missed it in the moment, but it dawned on him, when he got out of the room and they got talking about it, that there really wasn't so much thing as too many customers. Like last year, they serviced 50, but if these people paid up front, then they could buy the stuff they needed for the new greenhouse. They could hire the 4 more people they'd need to hire. They would have everything that they needed to service those 200 customers and more. So they went into their bank, they set it all up. They went into their bank with, the post-dated checks and all of the prepayment and set everything up. And it was no problem. They went from, we do a CSA, we have about 50 customers, to I think it's probably the biggest community shared agriculture food delivery program going on that I know of in the Shuswap. It's huge.
Yeah, I used to be part of that with my mother. And the exciting thing about that is you never knew what was coming in the box. And you'd get some vegetables that, thank goodness, Louis would actually give you the recipe so you could figure out what to do with it, right? So that was really quite amazing.
Yeah, it is like, it really is. One of our people used to be a professional truck driver, and she can tell some pretty hairy stories about, what goes on in the trucking vegetables around the world. She was referred to as the tomato lady. Hi, Tanya. And, she doesn't do what she used to do for a variety of reasons, but, we take it for granted that our food will be handled with courtesy, with respect, with care. And I hate to tell a lot of you that it just ain't so. When I had a friend who worked in a meat packing plant. They were out of Winnipeg and Red Deer. And then a contract was signed whereby prison labor was brought in to work there and with the chickens and that. Now, a while back, some of you may have seen the horrendous video of chickens being just horribly, horribly treated by workers at a chicken farm. Well, it turned out that the majority of those people involved in that were actually prisoners who were on a work placement program. They had no incentive to work with those birds. They had no liking to work with those birds. They were literally sentenced to work with those birds. Ditto with the people working in the meat packing plant. And when the Listerioso outbreak started shortly after that, my friend was, no doubt, if you knew what they were doing to that meat because they don't like what they have to do, you wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I took her seriously.
Yeah, it's horrific. I know that the meat inspectors would never, ever have their children buy the product because they know what actually gets allowed to be passed, right? Anyway, we don't need to go there, but it's gross.
Yeah. But what we do need to look at is the fact that if you don't know where your food is coming from, you don't know your food.
That's right. And you don't know what you're putting inside of yourself, and you're subject to all sorts of stuff. I mean, there's such a gross one that I saw where they take a fresh piece of pork, like 2 inches, like freshly cut, pour Coca-Cola on it, and the amount of worms that come out of that pork is absolutely disgusting. We're not talking about little ones. We're talking about big, fat, juicy ones out of a brand new, literally raw piece of pork, right?
Yeah.
It's top A quality, right?
Yeah. So I buy my meat from organic farmers that are local. And when you take it all into account, it actually probably costs me less than being in the stores. I know I've done the math on it. And, I may be paying $6 a pound for my ground burger, but I'm also paying $6 a pound for my T-bone steak. So, yeah. And, so, and in terms of like food sovereignty, some of you can be in a position where you can actually go beyond gardening. And the first step beyond gardening that I really encourage people to take is backyard chickens. Okay. And if you choose the right breed of chickens, and there are some fabulous ones out there, they will not rip up your garden. They will not harm your food. They will eat the bugs. They will eat, all sorts of things that you feed them. They will provide you lovely, wonderful eggs. If you're not a vegetarian, when their life is at an end, you can indeed eat them as well. One of the places that I respect and admire is a organization that I believe is defunct now. It was called Arusha. And what they did, rather than take bulgur wheat and set up feeding stations in Africa and other places, and that they went to places like Guatemala and Africa, and they worked with the people there, relearning and recapturing what they used to eat, what they used to grow, and adding protein to their diets by teaching them to raise chickens and to raise rabbits if they were meat eaters. And they would repeatedly teach everybody that the idea of the chicken is the chicken eats what you cannot eat, okay? It eats what you do not wish to eat. It eats what you cannot eat. It eats the compost you throw away. Then you eat the egg for protein and you eat the chicken for protein. And, this is the way you maximize how you can feed yourself from a small piece of land. More and more towns are allowing backyard chickens. 3 to 5 hens in the backyard will usually go completely unnoticed by anybody at all. And if you're silly enough to get a rooster, well, you explain it to the neighbors.
Right. The other possibility, what we did in running the youth hostel called Texas Lake Hostel in the 70s, where we had 135,000 people through our front door over 7 years. And we grew about an acre and a half of organic garden and fed vegetarian meals, 3 meals a day. So because we couldn't get our staples, we were part of Fed Up Co-op and created our own food co-op in Hope, British Columbia, so that we could buy it in bulk. And I remember going down to Vancouver and doing our weeks, of duty in the Fed Up Co-op, putting all the deliveries through for British Columbia together to be trucked to all the different communities. It was a great opportunity to meet other people that had similar values. Over that week in Vancouver, it was community. It was great.
And you probably shipped food out to the food buying club that I belong to in northern Alberta that, we would not have eaten at all well had we had to rely on what was there, because it was abysmal. But we could buy a 50-pound bag of organic popcorn and hand it around. We could get like organic lentils that weren't 35 years old. We could get all sorts of things by buying it in bulk. And we need really people take control of your food as much as you can. The more processed, Tyhson and I were talking about what processed food has done to people. And You know, if we can just go back to our beloved fellow inhabitants of so-called BC here that actually are the true guardians of the unceded territory that we are on, you know, their diabetes, their high rate of diabetes is due to the crappy diet that has been foisted upon them. Campbell River, a resident Campbell River, made a commitment to go back to an indigenous food diet. And within 2 years' time, other bands were actually going there and saying, okay, help us, teach us, you know, because the incidence of diabetic problems plummeted. Now, diabetes is not cured, but on the indigenous food diet, there was nothing that triggered the spikes, the lows, the huge imbalances, the infections, the problems that attended. Their teeth.
Yeah.
There were no finer, healthier people than the North American natives prior to
All
being.
Aboriginal people had, you know, extremely good teeth and wide, big jaws. And Preston
Yes.
does research around all the mouths shrink with all that flour and white sugar, and all the tooth decay happens. You know,
Yeah.
it's just horrendous.
And how did we conquer this continent? We conquered it by destroying the buffalo. We conquered it by destroying the various salmon areas. We conquered it by overhunting the otters. We conquered it by, you know, depriving the indigenous people of as many of their natural abundant foods as we possibly could. And we frequently put them in places where they had absolutely no hope or no knowledge or information on how to produce food from those situations.
And it's even worse now. If you really want to do the research, and if you want to just look up Mr. Bill Gates and see what he's doing around purchasing farmland in all over the world, then you'll have an idea about what we're talking about, which is vertical integration of the food industry. When you look at the food industry, other than oil, the movement of oil, the vertical integration in the food industry is absolutely amazing. Right from the farmer, all the way through to the trucking, all the way to cargo. Everything is integrated, all owned by about, you know, less than 20 to 30 big companies, transnational corporations that control your food. And put on top of that, genetic engineering and modification, and you've got control of the world's population through their food. I mean, this is serious stuff. We're talking about liberation. We're talking about food sovereignty. We're talking about sovereignty of you as a human being. This is the fundamental basis, is being able to feed yourself, have clean water, and a healthy body, right?
Yes, and it's absolutely vital. I'd like to put in a huge plug for Weston A. Price and the Weston A. Price Foundation with their information about indigenous food, the research that they've done in Sally Fallon's book on called Nourishing Traditions, where she tells you why all these good old foods that we have been told were don't eat them, like, you know, real fermented sauerkraut, and, you know, why they were good for us, what purpose they serve, and why the imitation food-like substances cannot match it, you know? If you're a reader, for God's sake, please go get yourself a copy of In Defense of Food. Okay.
Yeah, it's really, really important.
Yeah. And the other thing, if you're a watcher, if you're somebody who loves to watch things and you've got Netflix, check out Rotten, Rotten. It starts with avocados, and you may never buy another avocado after you watch it. And it culminates with chickens, which the chicken industry, as laid out by this movie, with the genetics being controlled. The farmers can only buy a specific chicken genetic strain. They can only feed it specific foods. They can only do it a specific way. It's all under contract to a company. They actually don't even own the chickens they're raising.
Amazing.
So, you know, we need to regain our control. I grew up on a farm. If you wanted to control an animal, you controlled its food.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up when I was a kid, and I, can't remember this, but I've been told that my dad did contract for Hunt's did tomato crop, and had a total frost that wiped out the whole crop. He lost absolutely everything, right? No
Yep.
insurance, no nothing. So, I mean, when you're under contract and doing food processing for Hunt's or any other one international company, it is a tragedy, right? It is just
Right. And when you're monocropping like those companies do, and really wiping out diversity, you are so limiting yourself. And this is why we talk about bioregional diversity,
yeah,
individual diversity. I remember in about 99 or so, there was a tomato blight in the Shuswap, and so many tomatoes didn't make it.
I remember.
I had, yeah, I had 3 varieties of tomatoes in my garden that were blight resistant. I lost absolutely everything else, but these 3 resisted it. Well, you can be darn sure I labeled those seeds as blight hardy, because this is what we want. We don't want weak, wimpy food that has to be grown in a greenhouse, that has to be fed specific things. We want stuff that grows where we live, that lives with the conditions that we live, that thrives where we live, so it can provide us with what our immune system needs. The studies that they did around organic food in the hospices in England about 15, 20 years ago was very eye-opening, because they were noticing a variance in who was recovering and who wasn't, and they were having a hard time pinning it down. And then somebody made a connection that it was the carrots. It was da-da. Well, when they looked further, they realized it was not the carrots. These were organic carrots. It was the organics. And what they realized is that if you raise food in a factory situation where everything is perfect and ideal, and it never has to deal with a bug, it never has to deal with a blight, it never has to deal with anything, it has no immune system because it's never had to develop one. So it can't feed your immune system because it has no components to give you.
That's why people have to run around and think about the job.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really, I know that this was kind of a long reach for some people in terms of a gardening show. And if you're looking forward to the usual plethora of good tips and that, please sign up to the show. Please come and join us. I do have so much that I wish to share in a teaching capacity, but it was incredibly important for me to feel like I could give you the information and the reasoning behind the why grow your own food, why save your own seeds, why store your own stuff, why cook what you eat, and I really hope that everybody takes that step and grows for themselves, even if it's just the herbs you're going to put on everything. Please learn these things. Don't let them unwild you and put you in a cage where all the food gets put through the bars.
I just like to honor our mutual grandma, Mary Thomas. And the thing about Mary Thomas, which is I want to remember and will always remember, was just what a gentle soul she was and what an amazing teacher she was. Having come out of that residential school and so much physical abuse and trauma, she was always there for us. She was always there as our teacher. There was no animosity. And you could always tell in an Indigenous meeting who was a student of Mary Thomas, because they always spoke from inclusion. They always talked about reconciliation. They always talked about coming together across the divide that most people are still caught in between Black or white or First Nations or whatever. Mary was never that way. And she had every reason not to be that way, but for some reason she was able to open her heart and embrace everybody and teach everybody these traditional values. So I'm truly grateful to have her as a grandma.
Thank you. And she often said, I remember asking her one time, which of these young men were her actual biological sons. And she said, oh, they're all my children. You're all my children. But I never heard Mary speak in anger. And as you well know, I can get fired up. Boy, I can get fired up. And I'm old now, so I don't get it quite there. But when I was younger, I could get so fired up. And Mary would gently point out, not necessarily to me at that moment, but she would find ways throughout the relationship to explain to people that how when you approach a situation or you try to resolve and you yourself are angry, the only thing the person's going to hear is your anger. They're not going to hear your words. They're not going to see your point of view. They're not going to want to listen. They're just going to hear the anger and want to defend. And boy, that was a lesson for me to learn.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mary Thomas, wherever you are. Thank you for being part of our lives. And I look forward to her memoirs, which Dorothy Argent is putting together. And I love the opportunity to, I can't remember her name, from the University of Victoria, who came up and interviewed all the elders.
Nancy Cooper.
Yeah, and amazing workshops that Nancy's put on about teaching us about how to make Indigenous ice cream and all those sorts of wonderful things that she learned from all these grandmas, right? So
yeah,
I love that this oral tradition is going to be embodied in ways in which we can take it into this generation and next generations.
Yes, Nancy Turner's ethnobotany books are not only well written and accurate, but Nancy was big enough and honest enough to fully credit each and every elder in each and every tribe that she worked with. And, cooks them, Nancy, cooks them, I'm pleased. Well, wow, here we are at the top of the hour again. And I'm just so grateful that you gave me the opportunity to talk to people about, the incredible need to look after yourselves so that you can learn to look after each other.
Absolutely, yeah, truly important. You're touching a subject that's dear to my heart. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. We're back same time, same place. Next week, we're going to be diving back into the garden. And what do we have next week coming up?
Next week, what we have coming up is late transplanting, how to kind of handle that. And then we're going to be looking at bugs and thugs and ugly stuff that you might not want in the garden.
Okay.
Bugs, slugs, and other thugs, I call it.
Bugs, slugs, and other thugs. Get those chickens.
You got it.
All right. Bye for now, everybody.